Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Lucy in the Sky. And what Lucy in the Sky is essentially about is we center on this astronaut named Lucy Cola, and she has recently returned to Earth, and basically since then, she has shown very clear signs of PTSD and starts to exhibit a lot of very self-destructive behavior in that way. She's closed herself off, she starts to tarnish many key relationships, and basically the rest of the movie is us trying to see if she can hopefully if she can hopefully come back to Earth mentally, and if she can finally recover from this, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Lucy in the Sky overall, I was very excited for this film, not just because of the stellar cast, because yeah, there are some great, people here like Natalie Portman, Hamm, Zazie, Beetz, Dan Stevens, list goes on, for sure, but that definitely has me excited, but especially knowing that Hawley was going to be directing and basically helming the entire film, that alone had me very excited. I think he's one of the best visionaries working today. I think he's given us some of the best TV of the decade, for sure, in both Fargo and Legion. I love what he's contributed with both of these shows, and I was very excited to see him lend his talents to something that was far more short-lived, because, he's so used to law-informed storytelling. Was excited to see how he would be able to do with a feature-length film. I was excited to see how that would turn out. I was hoping this could be something really thrilling. I thought that the story itself could have been really compelling, and it sucks. Lucy in the Sky is easily one of the biggest disappointments of the entire year that really falls short in many various areas and really just annoyed me to no end, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And look, I'll say this, there's a lot of things that are wrong with this film, but the cast is not one of them. For the most part, everyone does do a pretty solid job here, and I will say this, in terms of performances, this is a much better performance from Natalie Portman than the last film I saw from her that was disappointing. She does what she can to make this role work, as, I think, as inconsistent and how poorly written the lead character is. Portman does a lot to really ground her. Portman does a lot to get us to really care for her. There are some key moments that I think she actually does a really good job with, particularly moments exploring her PTSD, how much this has affected her, but also just how entranced and how affected she was by exploring the galaxy. I think Portman does a really strong job here, and even, like I said, even in moments where the movie isn't really working, she pretty much does remain a highlight throughout. This is a pretty solid performance for her, but I'm not gonna lie, I do think that this is one of those roles that really anyone could have played, but Portman overall does do a really solid job here. And the rest of the cast also does do a pretty solid job. Hamm is always good, and that's definitely the case here. I really did like Dan Stevens here, Zazie Beetz. Ellen Burstyn, I thought out of everyone seemed like she was having the most fun. She actually adds a lot to this, and I definitely really did like her for sure. Colman Domingo was really good. Even Pearl Amanda Dickson, the young daughter of both Portman and Stevens, respectively, I thought she did a really solid job here. I was impressed by her for the most part. Really, again, there's a lot of problems with this movie, but the acting, for the most part, I think everyone did at least a pretty solid job here. It is serviceable overall. But now we get to the directing and the writing, which this is unfortunately where we really get into the thing that I think really hurts this film, and that's sadly Hawley's directing. And look, I really do respect him as a director. I think that he has a very specific vision. I think that he has a very specific style, and I think he did a really good job with that. Unfortunately, I feel like that style got in the way of this entire film. I just don't think Hawley knew what he wanted this to be, really. It seems very tonally inconsistent. At points, this is a very serious drama, exploring the very serious effects of space travel, how much this can alter an individual, how this can ruin their life pretty much, and how this can really set them on a dark path. And I think it does, when it's focusing on that, it actually does do a good job for the most part. I think he actually does have a really solid tone there, and then it'll venture off and be something completely different entirely. And I just don't think he had a very good idea of what he wanted this to be. And it sucks because I adore his other works, but this just really fell flat, and I don't think he did a very good job directing this film. The dramatic moments don't really work in the way they should. The comedic moments almost always fall flat. There was not a single joke that really did get me, unless it was uttered by Ellen Burstyn, because I thought she overall was doing a good job. But other than her, I mean, I really don't think he did a good job directing this. And the writing as well is pretty much a disaster. I mean, the writing here is pretty terrible, because here's the thing. I am all for a film exploring, like I said, PTSD and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a really interesting concept. A really good way to go about this is thank you for your service. Yes, that is, you know, not space travel, but it's a really good look at how that can affect an individual and how it can really cripple a lot of their key relationships and things like that. That is a really good exploration of PTSD. Or even First Man last year, even though it's the last few minutes of the movie, it does a far better job of exploring how complex that is. Here, they barely scratch the surface. I mean, every so often you'll have a scene where Lucy is very disinterested in what's going on. She zones out frequently and things like that. And again, that could be really interesting. The problem is when your lead character, like Lucy, is someone who is so unlikable, it's very hard to get attached. Because yes, I'm all for the PTSD stuff. What I don't give a shit about is all of the marital problems that she's having with Dan Stevens and this affair she's having with Jon Hamm's character for virtually no reason. They don't do a really good job of showing like why she would gravitate towards Jon Hamm in this film, you know, what is really about him that makes her interested, and what are her real problems with Dan Stevens. I mean, on the surface, these two seem to have a really good marriage. There's never really a point in the movie where we see them, you know, where we see Dan Stevens being abusive or he's being too much toward, like, he's you know, he's doing too much or he's going out of his way, and this is, you know, a relationship that's just not working out. It doesn't really seem that way. It seems like a pretty healthy relationship, but the film tells us otherwise. We have dialogue here where she talks about, oh, how terrible her husband is, or we have dialogue uttered by her daughter where she's talking about how her father is just really awful to her and things like that, but we have no indication, we have no evidence to prove that. We have no way of showing how these characters know that, so because of that, it just makes our lead character very unlikable in that way. She seems to blame literally anything that she has caused on others. She never takes accountability for anything, especially in the third act. Pretty much anything that happens to her, she just blames it on the men in her life, and it just makes for a really shallow character that I honestly really hated following, and it really alienated me from alienated me from this film pretty quickly. And again, I hate saying that because Natalie Portman is doing a really good job here, but her character is absolute dog shit. I mean, there was not a single point in this movie where I really felt for Lucy. They don't do a very good job with that very much at all. And the other characters as well are not very well written. They're barely even characters. I mean, there's really not a lot to them. Dan Stevens is just the husband that is honestly asking her really rational questions. Like, he can tell there's something off about her. He can tell that there's just something not right. So the questions he's asking her, I think, are completely sound, and I don't understand why the film tries to make this seem like a problem. I mean, I feel like if anyone was going through Lucy's situation, their, you know, significant other would question, you know, what the hell's going on, because she is being distant in that way. She is closed off. There's a lot of things she's just not saying to them and that she's having a hard time verbalize, and I don't think that anything that Dan Stevens says to her is really stretching it. I don't think he's overreaching in any way. I think it makes perfect sense why he's asking her these questions. Jon Hamm also, there's really nothing to like about him, and there's this really dumb love triangle with him, Lucy, and Zazie Beetz' character, who he's having an affair with at this point, that I just did not care about at all. This guy is just so shallow and unlikable, and again, they don't do a good job of showing, like, why Lucy would want to be with him, other than, I guess, Dan Stevens is boring. I mean, I don't really know, to be honest with you. They don't do a good job with that. And just overall, they don't do a really good job with exploring much of anything in this film. There's so many little plot revelations that just kind of happen. There's a scene, for example, where Portman finds this gun in Ellen Bernstein's character's purse, and you think that's going to go somewhere interesting. You think maybe, oh, maybe Bernstein is going to do something erratic, or she's going to end up shooting someone, or this is going to come into play somehow, and it never does. It never comes back up. It's dropped immediately, and there are many scenes that are like that in this movie, and I just don't know what happened here. I have to think that maybe it's just that Noah Hawley has grown so accustomed to writing TV that he just couldn't do the same for a movie. He just couldn't, he needed to make this into a TV series to really make this story feel satisfying, but I don't think that he is to fully blame either, because he's not the only writer for this movie. The other two writers that he is working with haven't had any experience before, and it really does show, because the writing here is just completely inconsistent. Again, I would be fine if it was exploring some really challenging material, but it barely scratches the surface of it. Not to mention, halfway through the film, this becomes something different entirely. It becomes this, like, weird, like, road trip female empowerment movie, and that half is not what the first half of this movie was at all. I really don't know what ended up happening here, but the screenplay is just an absolute mess here. There's so many lines that are just really bad, especially one involving this popular joke. You'll know it when you see it, but the way they use it is so dumb, and there's many moments like that throughout the film. This is just easily one of the messiest screenplays I have seen all year, and I hate saying that because, again, there's a lot that I really do want to latch onto here, but it's just not very well written at all. But the cinematography here also really stems back to what I said, that I really do think Noah Hawley's vision got in the way of this film, because if you've seen Legion, you know something that he loves to do is really play around with aspect ratios and what you can do with them. And for Legion, I feel like this was always purposeful. I feel like it worked for the weirdness of that show, all the stuff he was trying to do. Here, it just feels pretentious. It honestly really does. And it feels like the only reason that he did this is to add character to something that wasn't there. If you haven't seen the trailers for this movie, the aspect ratios are constantly changing in this film. This isn't like Legion, where every so often it'll go from like widescreen to like a normal letterboxed, or like it'll go to like a fishbowl or something. Like, no, this is constantly changing, even during scenes. There are scenes where the aspect ratio will just like stretch out more, it'll like shorten, and Hawley's defense for this was basically that, I did this because I wanted to show how closed off Lucy was from society. You know, I wanted to show how she herself wasn't open in that way. So it's a closed aspect ratio, and I don't really get the correlation there. I don't really understand how this is how you needed to express it. It's a really weird way of going about it, and honestly, it really turned me off in the movie, and I'm sorry, but it's really hard to stay invested when the aspect ratio keeps changing like every 5 seconds. Now, I will say, this third act, it does calm down. Eventually, it sticks to an aspect ratio, and it stays there. You know, it finally does stick to one, but for a while, it's playing around with, like, all these different sizes, and it just doesn't work at all, especially when it changes during scenes. I would be fine if, let's say, it was like First Man, where the scenes in outer space are in widescreen, while the scenes in, while the scenes that aren't in space, are just her going about her daily life, are different, are just, widescreen, or are, a different size or something like that. Like, I would have been fine with that, but this film has like 5 or 6 different aspect ratios. One of them literally, and I'm not joking about this, I wish that I was joking here, but there is literally one that starts off on one side of the screen, and then the same scene moves to the other side of the screen. So you go from a left side, where the other half is blackness, and then it goes from the right side, and the other half is also blackness. And it's baffling. I don't know what Noah Hawley was thinking here. I really think that he just got so into the idea of playing with aspect ratios. This is something that was just so enticing to him that he just couldn't turn away from it, and it really ruined almost the entire film. It took me out of the movie very frequently and made it very hard to care about what the hell was going on. Not just because I didn't care about the characters, but also just because of how headache-inducing it really is. It really is something you need to see to be believed. You've seen the trailers and it bothered you. It will bother you even more in the movie, honestly. It's probably one of the worst things about it. I will say, you know, the space stuff is actually really well shot. There definitely are some scenes that were a little bit intense for sure, and I do think were shot overall pretty well. When it's not, you know, aside from the aspect ratios, the cinematography isn't all that bad, but again, that really does bring it down for sure. The score here by Jeff Russo, I actually did really like, but again, it's Jeff Russo, so this is to be expected. He always does deliver in that department. The editing to this film, though, is incredibly choppy. There are many scenes that they're cutting back and forth, and it just doesn't work at all. The space stuff especially, every single time, it feels like an afterthought. It really does. I mean, even though, yes, the movie is supposed to be her dealing with PTSD, there is barely any scene of her in space and us getting to see what all these characters are talking about. There's a scene, for example, where John Hamm is talking to her about how, you know, she's entered space and she's seen things that no one else has, and so because of that, it's very much affected her, but we never get to see these things with her. That would be like if in First Man, you have Neil Armstrong going to the moon, and then right when he's about to get there, we just cut to credits, and it goes to him, you know, it cuts to like a couple days later when he's been off the moon. No, we need to actually see what this character has been through. We need to actually see the journey that she's taken, so we actually care, so we actually can see why she would be acting this way, but there's nothing that really supports that quite well. And like I said before, the third act of this film goes in a direction where I legitimately don't know what they were thinking. It seemed like they didn't know how to end this film, so they just tacked this like female empowerment message at the end that just really didn't work at all. I'm all for that message, but it just doesn't apply to this film, and honestly made things really laughable. There's a scene especially that I was honestly stifling my laughter during just because of how dumb it really was, and again, it really does not factor into you know, the whole her overcoming her PTSD really all that well. And look, I know this is based on a true story. I know that this is based on a woman who was having this affair and she ended up going to jail and things like that, but I doubt it ended up playing out in the laughable fashion that it did here. I'm sure it did happen, but not in the way that it happens here, because it's just too ridiculous to believe. So overall, this whole film just feels like such a wasted opportunity. It has actors that are pretty decent. It has some moments that could have been really interesting, but overall, it is completely sunk by a very awful screenplay that is populated by really unlikable characters, many choices that just don't make any sense, and direction that I really just think got in the way of this film. I do still think Noah Hawley is very talented. I think that he definitely can make another great film. I think this is just a sign of him not being ready to make that jump. I think he had a hard time doing that, but I do think that it could happen again. I know he's got, supposedly, that Dr. Doom movie is still happening. I hope that's the film that shows that, okay, yes, he can do movies, because this definitely isn't it at all. This is not the kind of film that I think he should. This is not the kind of film that I want to see him do. There's definitely things that could have worked, but overall, this is a very disappointing film that really let me down in many different areas. And unfortunately, I am going to give Lucy in the Sky overall a D+. So overall, guys, in my review of Lucy in the Sky, let me know what you guys saw of this movie overall. Left your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.